Hi there, welcome back to my channel. This is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer. This video is about my July reads, my month in review. All the books I read, not going from the first book to the last book, but just going in different categories of books I read during the month. We've got a lot to go through. Let's start now. So it is a bit distracting with this video because as I'm recording it, our cat is rolling around on the floor in front of me, wanting attention. And hopefully in this video we won't get little meows here and there, but who knows because our cat is quite vocal. Anyway, let's start off with classic reads, the first category in this video. Now, for July, I had two books to choose from. They were the Canterbury Tales and Moby Dick. What did I choose? Well, I chose the Canterbury Tales. Now, what did I think? So this book was quite interesting. So Chaucer, of course, is the author. And I think it was written during the 1300s. Now, this is a collection of stories. And for the time, it left me wondering, actually, when I was reading this, what books were people reading? What did people find enjoyable at the time? And I just kept thinking, some of these stories, if people wrote them now, new. Some of these stories, I think, that would be picked up by censors, I think. I mean, readers out there, I think, would just not like stories like this if they were written now, some of them anyway. And maybe wonder what people were reading for enjoyment back in those days in the 1300s. But anyway, collection of stories, of course, and there are a range of tones and themes and characters and styles, not all the same, and that was good because if all these stories were the same, it'd get quite boring, I think. And of course, in a collection of stories, you don't like them all. Some of the stories I liked a lot. Some were a bit boring, and of course there's one there, I can't remember the name of it, but one was felt like a sermon in a way. I think it was the last book in the collection. It just felt like a sermon, a very difficult one to get through because it was so tedious and so boring and so dense in the way it was told. But many other stories in this collection were just wonderful. Some were, a bit bawdy, a bit racy. Some were quite funny. Great characters, great interactions in the story. I think one story actually was borrowed from the Decameron, and I think when I read this, I noticed that, and I was just thinking, well, it felt so familiar, that story, and I'm thinking, did I read this just in this collection beforehand? But it was just like a retelling of a story from Decameron. So that was interesting why one story in the collection was borrowed. I'm not sure why. But the rest of the stories in the collection just felt fresh and new anyway to me. The stories do poke fun at many people at the time. Nobles, knights, clergymen, monks, merchants, rich people, just people at trades as well, like carpenters, that sort of thing. It pokes fun at a lot of people in these stories. And you get, as stories go on in this collection, you have one character who's one profession. And it happened, I think, maybe more than once in this story. But one I remember was we had one profession, it was telling a story about another profession. And it was this saying that those professions, people in those professions can't be trusted. They're all scoundrels. And then the character who was a profession in this book, he gets offended and tells a story about the other guy's profession and makes them all out to be scoundrels or can't be trusted. That was interesting. It was like tit for tats going on in this collection sometimes between characters. That was interesting. Having characters in a story telling stories, but it was written by this one guy who was writing about characters telling stories. That was quite interesting in the way it's framed in this book as well. I found many stories in this collection very tongue-in-cheek. I found the collection overall mostly enjoyable, and I don't think it was something I would read again. I am glad I read it just once. I don't think I'd go read all the stories again. Maybe I'd pick one here and there to read in the future, just one here and there. But overall, I wouldn't read the whole collection again. So what's going to be the classic read in August? There'll be two books to choose from. Let's find out. The first book is The first choice is Germinal. I'm not sure if I'll choose that. Let's find out what book number 2 could be. The Mysteries of Udolpho. Now, I am interested in that story. I understand it's quite gothic in the way it's told. The whole story is quite gothic. So I may choose that one, but who knows? You'll find out in the month in review for August anyway. Okay, let's move to the next section. The next section is all about random country reads. So, for each month, I have a random picking program that picks one country per month. And from that country that's picked, I have to read a book written by an author born in that country. Now, the list of countries was about 50 or so, and I don't know what country is going to be picked. And it could be a country where it's very hard to find a book by an author from that country anyway, from my local library network or wherever I try to find books from. And sometimes it's very easy, you never know. And for July, the country was the Czech Republic. I chose Wayward and Newts, written by Karel Capek. Now, I like this book a lot. The great thing about this random country challenge is I'm finding out about books I'd have no idea were out there otherwise. I would not have even known about this book if not for this challenge, and I enjoy this book so much. So this story is basically about colonization and history. It's a satire on those things. And in this book we have this captain, a captain of a ship, and he's out there, exploiting people, exploiting natural resources for his own country. And then he finds by accident these newts. And he learns about them first because the native people in the areas on the islands call them demons. So there's one island no one goes to because there's demons there. He finds out they're not demons, they're newts. Many of them. There's a lot of newts there. And he finds out these newts are quite intelligent. And at first he teaches them just very basic things. He teaches them how to use tools, basically. They can start using tools and they start obeying things. And then he trains them doing more things and even to work for him. And then it leads on from there. And he takes them and he populates different islands with these newts as well. He treats them like his own workforce in this story, all for exploitation and gain. So there you have the first elements of colonization in those first moments of this story. It's very tongue-in-cheek. The way it's told, I think, is very just humorous in many ways. There are great moments in this story, great characters, and I just like the overall structure and feel of this book. I like what it does. I like what it kind of teaches the reader as well about history, about how things can turn on people who are in power as well. And we have different things in this story where people think they're doing good, and those good things start to backfire on them as well. That's where I think a lot of the satire comes into the story as well. A great story. It's very well written, great characters, great moments in this book. The newts in this story are great characters as well. I like them a lot. I just like this story so much. I could recommend this book very much. So we have to find out what the country will be for August. Let's find out now. Haiti. The country is Haiti. Now, I think it'll be challenging to find a book in my library network from an author from Haiti. I'm not sure. I will try my hardest to find a book from an author who was born in that country. Let's move on to the next section, which is monthly prompts. So, each month I have a prompt. I had a video talking about those prompts at the start of the year, and I have two books to choose from. I have a main book I have to read from that prompt, then a secondary book which I read if I have time. Let's remind ourselves of the prompt for July. Read a book that captures the magical beauty of winter. It could be set in a snowy location or have themes of survival, quiet reflection, or cold weather coziness. The book I have to read is Snow Child, and then if I have time, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. So I did read Snow Child. I do like this story. It's like a modern day fairy tale, really, the way it's told, the whole structure. So essentially, it's about this husband and wife. They move to Alaska, kind of like during frontier times. They're trying to survive. And that survival, that struggle is told so well in this story. You really feel that. You feel the cold, you feel the hunger, you feel the desperation sometimes, the danger, the elements. Elements are dangerous at that time in Alaska. Creatures around in the forests are dangerous. Just doing normal things like farming can be dangerous in Alaska during those times as well. It could be very hard to try to, survive, to try to make a living in those areas at that time. That's all told very well in this story. And these two characters, they're sad because they want children, they want a family. And just in the first snowfall while they're there, they make a snowman, they decorate it, and then that next day, they start seeing something in the woods, and they start experiencing things. And then eventually they learn about this young girl in the woods. And it links to this folk tale about a child coming from a snowman, people making a snowman, and then that springs to life a child, a snow child. That's the whole basis of the story, the interactions with this young girl in the woods. Other things happen, of course. Time moves on in the story. People get older, and we have other characters in the area as well, with interactions and being, support characters in the story that add different layers and different storylines and many great moments in the book as well. I might go into all those in this video because I don't want to give it all away. But the overall tone and feel of this book I think is quite good. I think sometimes it can be too rose-colored glasses feel with the book. I think sometimes it doesn't go deep enough into some of those darker things in the story. I think it just feels too nice sometimes for what it is. I think there are moments there that could be a bit more serious, a bit more dangerous, but this book doesn't. It takes a different tact to it, and it makes it feel different. It makes it feel nicer, more gentle. I think too much of that happens in this story. That's the only fault I think with this book. But I know why it's doing that, because it wants to make this like a fairy tale, a modern day fairy tale. But really, fairy tales weren't all light and loveliness and hope. Fairy tales could be dark and dangerous. I mean, that's how they were written in the first place. So if you're going to make a modern day fairy tale, why not do that as well? Why not make it dark and dangerous and things like that? It doesn't have to be light and airy and just full of hope and good feelings. It can be dark and dangerous. It can have characters doing awful things. That's what fairy tales can be. So what is the August prompt? Let's find out. Choose a book written by a female author or featuring strong, complex women at its centre. The must-read book is Where the Crawdads Sing, If I Have Time, The Handmaid's Tale. Let's move on to the random bookshelf reads. For each month of this year, there are 6 books chosen at random from my shelves I have to read. I had a list at the start of the year of about 170 or so books, and then I have a program each month that randomly picks 6 books from that list. So of course that list shrinks down after each month, so I don't know what books will be chosen from month to month. Now I'll go through them all. There are 6 books. Let's start. So the first book is The Quorum, written by Kim Newman. It's a horror. It's meant to be a Faustian style horror. I didn't like this book much at all. I don't like the writing style. It felt like it was written by, a teenager who was drunk, basically. That's what it felt like. I didn't like the story itself, really. I didn't like the characters. This has to be one of my least favorite books of all time. At least one of my least favorite books of this year. It really is, because I just didn't really get into the book at all. I don't like the horror elements. I mean, when they were there, really, I don't like them. The main character is meant to be this big bad character. He appears in the first couple of chapters and then he's hardly in the story. And what does he do? Hardly anything. It's really about these guys who are trying to be mean to their friend for personal gain. And for me, that was a strange way to bring this Faustian style thing into a story. I just felt this book was all over the place, and that writing style was just awful. And then we had characters with very similar sounding names. And in the same paragraph, it's like character shifts, POV shifts for those characters in the same paragraph, and just changed so many times like that in the story. That made it so confusing to read, actually, especially when those names were very similar indeed. So for me, this book, for many, many reasons, was just like, don't read it. Basically, I can't recommend this. If you have this book on your shelves, if you're planning to read it at some stage, if you've heard of it, don't read it. I've read it for you. I can tell you this book is not worth reading. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. My version of this book on the cover, if you can see it, says Thriller of the Year, and I don't know why it has that on there, because it's really not. I'm aware this book is maybe 10 years or so old, but I didn't enjoy this really much at all, and I do know that many people do love this book. I don't know why. This book to me felt more like Days of Our Lives than anything else. It just felt quite tedious, actually, and in some ways quite repetitive. And then talking about characters, I mean Amy. Amy is written, we're told she's a brilliant sociopath. We're told that so many times when we're reading this. It doesn't come across like that at all. I mean, she's so brilliant. She's duped later on in the story. She's outwitted by characters that wouldn't outwit her if she was a brilliant sociopath. So for me, that was quite annoying in the story, actually. And it's not explained in the story. And I think it's quite unforgivable in a book like this, especially if it's marketed as Thriller of the Year. Then we have Nick, who's a walking void of charisma, he's really annoying as a character as well. And that's what I felt like with these 2 main characters. They were quite annoying. They were unlikable. And I get they're written to be unlikable. But Nick, I think, was just really unlikable for many reasons. And I couldn't get behind this character. And this idea of this treasure hunt as well, I mean, that was quite pathetic, I think, in the story. It's a big thing in the book. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't even get behind it. I just think the way that was played out in the story, I didn't like that at all. There's not much in this book I actually do like. I do think there's some little things there that are good, well done. The book is well written. I mean, Gillian Flynn can write. Stylistically, the book is okay. But for me, even to the conclusion of the story, what happens at the end, for me, that was just so unrealistic. It was just like, it's a mess, I think. And it feels like it's one of those books where it's like, let's go wild and crazy and make something big, unbelievable because the readers want that. I mean, do readers really want that? Who told readers that they want that? Who asked readers that we want something unbelievable and big, larger than life at the end of every thriller? Because it feels like that's what happens in many thrillers now. And I wonder if it started with this book, I don't know. Maybe this book is famous because it started that whole thing. This book I think, is meant to be famous because of the unreliable narrators in the story. But for me, I've seen better unreliable narrators than Amy in this story. I don't think this is worth all the fuss. And this feels like this book, the marketing, I think, worked with this story. It's so well marketed, I think, back in the day. I mean, it had to be so good, to be so famous. So for me, marketing gets all the points. This book is quite disappointing to me, especially after all the years I've heard about how good it is. Tangle of Lies, written by Patricia Potter. I've not read a book by this author before, and the hook at the start of this book was just amazing. Really great start to the story. Essentially, it's this woman, she is an adult, and she's returned to her hometown to live, and then she goes to her parents' house and finds her mother is missing. Mother's just gone. Nobody knows where she is. Her father doesn't know where her mother is. Nobody does. Then they find out her mother's been taken by the FBI. She's been taken allegedly because of a murder many years ago, before her parents were married. And we're told that very early on in the story. I mean, it's a great hook. We're told that her mother may not be the person she tells everybody she is. I mean, a great hook in a story like this. And I love stories like that. I like stories where somebody could be somebody else. I like things like that in movies and TV shows and in books. But after that great hook, that thing that really engaged me, and I thought, great, this is going to be a great read, it just started to become more midday movie later on. Very placid, just a bit obvious with what's going on. The romance in there as well that just felt a bit awkward. Didn't really add anything to the story. Didn't feel really true in the book. And it felt like that romance was trying to be pushed as the main thing in the story in many ways as well. So I was getting disappointed a lot later on after that great hook. People Next Door, written by Christopher Ransom. It's a mix between domestic thriller and kind of creature horror. I think that balance was quite good in this story, and I enjoyed this read quite a lot. The blurb boasts that the twist in this book is the best thing you'll read ever, but it's good, but it's not the best twist I've ever read. So I think, it's try to be hype marketing in its own blurb. It doesn't really work because when you read this, if you want to read it, you probably find the twist is good, it's surprising, but not the best thing since sliced bread. So a let down with that twist, from the blurb. But who kind of believes blurbs anyway? I don't. I don't really believe, when you get little quotes on blurbs by other authors or things, I don't believe those at all. I think they're paid for. As authors, obviously with the same agent or publisher or whatever, and they're either forced to do that, forced to put their name on a book, or they're paid to do that. There's nothing there, I think, with any blurb, any quote on a book from an author or a famous person where it's there because they genuinely want to put it there. It's all like, there's transactional in the way that's done. And that's how I think this blurb is. That blurb where it says the greatest twist, that feels transactional. Someone's written there for a reason, not because this book has the greatest twist ever. But the horror elements in this story are very good. The characters in this story are very good. A lot to like about this book. I enjoyed the read. I didn't know if I would when I started it, but I really did. I thought it was a quite enjoyable book. Not a fantastic book by any means, but it is quite enjoyable and a good read. If you enjoy horror, with a side of domestic tension, side of domestic suspense and thriller, read this book. It's a great book for that. Where Eagles Dare by Alistair MacLean. Now, this author is popping up on my videos quite often so far this year. I do have a few books from him on my shelf, and my picking program seems to be picking books from him quite often. Now, this book is quite typical for this author. We have great action scenes, we have some great tension and suspense, some great thrilling moments, some great scenery, and the weather as well in this story is almost like an enemy to our heroes. We have characters that are basically stereotypes as well, but what I like about this book and the books I read from this author in general is we have strong female characters, and it seems to buck the trend of books like this written at the same time. The characters in these books are female characters. They're vital to what goes on in the story. They really are. He writes these characters as just strong characters, independent, just really strong in the story, and they have agency. And I do like that about these stories. The second half of this book is a lot better than the first half. The first half has some great kind of scenes that really add suspense and tension very early on. That carries you through to the second half, which is more action-packed and more thrills and spills. I like that. I like the structure of this story is quite sound. It's a great action story. One of those reads that you can really just sit back and enjoy for a few hours and just while away an afternoon somewhere. The last book in this section is Slick and the Dead, written by Philip Cleef. This is a typical pulp action story. Entertaining when you read it, but quite forgettable afterwards. The characters are stereotypes. It's very British in feel as well. The protagonist, he gets into danger or sees dangerous things, and he's a bit shocked or surprised, and then suddenly he's very stoic. He takes control or takes charge. He knows what to do. It feels very British in that way, like British for the time period, the way when it was written. I do kind of like that feeling in the story as well, but also makes this book just feel that pulpish feel, that kind of feel where you think, okay, something's happening, but our hero may be in danger, but he's going to be okay. He's going to get out of it. It feels kind of James Bondish in that way with that character. And speaking of James Bond, the female lead in this book is just ripped out of a James Bond novel, basically. She really is. She doesn't add anything kind of strength-wise to the story. She has her agency in a way, does her own thing, but just her attitude, the way she describes the things she does, is very James Bondish in that way. And almost with the protagonist, the way he acts around her in the story, their interactions, feels very Bondish in that way as well. The villains in this book, they're almost written like to be gentlemen. There's discussions in this story between the protagonist and the villain that feel like two refined gentlemen sitting down and talking over tea. That was quite strange, but just also matches the whole tone and feel of this story. And makes you wonder, what is the end battle going to be, the end fight? What will that struggle be? Are they going to be struggling with weapons and things like that? Or is it going to be a game of bridge or something? That gentleman feel really shines through quite strongly in this story. The conclusion of this book just made me wonder, is this satire? Is it meant to be serious? I wasn't sure. It fit the tone and feel of the story, but also made it feel a bit disjointed. And overall, when I finished this book, it's quite forgettable mostly. Some interesting characters here and there, but just forgettable because it's very pulpish. And I don't mind that. I've read a couple of pulpish books this year, and I'm finding I enjoy them, and I want to find more of them and read more of them. I'm attracted to that tone and feeling stories for some reason. There's something about it, and I want to go back and read a lot of those books from that time period. So what will the random bookshelf reads be for August? Let's find out with the first book. Trust Me. That's the name of the book. I'm not saying trust me, but I'm saying the book is called Trust Me. But anyway, I'm not sure what it will be, but trust me, I'll find out in August. Okay, book 2. People Might Hear You. The title alone feels very threatening. I'll find out during August anyway. Okay, book 3. Goodbye California. I have no idea what the book will be like from that title. It could be anything really. Okay, book 4. Numbered Account. I'm thinking maybe financial thriller, financial mystery, something like that, just from the name of the story. Okay, book 5. Mother of Kings. I mean, it could be really anything, couldn't it? Could be historical, could be a fantasy, could be a horror in a way. Okay, I'll find out during the month. Book 6. Universal Harvester. I mean, that feels quite threatening, or it could be a story about a farm. I don't know. I'll find out during the month anyway. Deep Dive Authors is the next section. At the start of the year, I had authors selected, and I had certain authors where a random picking program picked books I had to read from them, and other authors where I just had to concentrate and read books from their catalogue. I only read one book in July from that list, and I have to say I'm failing a lot on these deep dive authors. I really am, because I'm getting distracted by other things, and that's in my nature as a reader. I had these plans for this, and then I just think, well, I'm going to do something else, and I got distracted, and now I'm just led onto something else, and I'm trying to fight my way back to this deep dive author list. Hopefully I'll read more of those books before the end of the year. I really want to, because a lot of them are on my shelves. I want to get rid of them. Anyway, the book I read from this list was a Stephen King book, and it was from a Buick 8. And I quite like this book. I think this book gets a bad rap. A lot of people put this on towards the bottom of the list of books they enjoy from Stephen King, but I quite enjoyed it. I think essentially this book is almost like people telling a folk tale, but of things that happen to them in the story. So they're talking about their past, but it's almost like folk tale way in the way it's described, because it's people sitting around telling a story to somebody else. And I like that. It's almost like telling, stories around a campfire in a way. I like the suspense. I like in this book, it's all about not knowing. Something strange turns up, something alien. You get certain events happening that can be frightening and chilling, but you don't know all the answers, and you're trying to work out what this thing actually is. That's what this story is about. It's also about friendship, camaraderie, all those sorts of things as well. But that not knowing, that mystery, that reminded me so much about things like The X-Files, the TV show Millennium, all those type of things where it's mysterious, it's sinister, it's chilling, it's otherworldly, but you don't get all the answers all the time. It's quite fun, I think, in a book like that. Well, I do anyway, because that not knowing, and it makes you wonder, makes you think, what could it be? It leads to this discussion, I think, about books like that. I think that's what King was trying to do with this book. You're trying to present something. It's like the not knowing, about people gathering together, trying to work something out as a team, but also, their theories, their discussions about it as well, and having these questions about, living with questions, living with the unknown can be just as chilling, just as horrifying as has something jumping out at you, at your face, and trying to kill you. That's what I get from this story. I enjoyed it quite a lot. Now for ARC reads during the month of July. I read 5 of them. The first was Bewitching, written by Silvia Moreno Garcia. A historical novel, well, part historical and part present day. But it's meant to be like a gothic kind of horror feel to these stories. And there's 3 timelines in this book, and each timeline has a different character as the protagonist. I have to say, the historical timeline for me was the best, overall. Had a great atmosphere, had great tone, a great character, great tension, and great moments in that timeline. The middle timeline, I think, was a waste of time, basically. Not much happens. Essentially, it could be like a bridging between the past and the present timeline, but that middle timeline was a waste of space, I think, in the story, honestly. And then the present day timeline, what was important, that atmosphere wasn't there. The gothic atmosphere wasn't there, and this book is meant to be gothic. I mean, the past timeline has some of that in the atmosphere, but overall, the gothic feel, the gothic atmosphere was just quite diluted, I think, hardly even there, and that's quite disappointing, because this is advertised and marketed as gothic. But it isn't a terrible story, and I think a lot of readers will enjoy it. Readers will take different things from it. I was just disappointed because I was wanting that gothic feel to it, that gothic horror feel, and I didn't get that. In the past timeline, though, we get atmosphere, we get other things going on in the story that are quite chilling and very interesting, and that horror element is the strongest in that past timeline. And I did enjoy characters, I enjoyed their interactions, I enjoyed the overall story in that past timeline, but it wasn't that gothic. We had atmosphere there that wasn't that gothic for me. It was more folktale-ish to me than gothic, more folklore horror than anything else. And it's the same with the present day timeline. It's more folklore horror. So I want gothic feel if it's meant to be marketed as gothic. How to Survive a Horror Story, written by Mallory Arnold, a horror. Now, at the start of this story, I thought it was very metaphor heavy, and I wondered, what will this be like? Is this writing style just going to be too pervasive through the whole story? Will I just dislike this book because of all the awkward and heavy metaphor use going on in the first part of the story? Fortunately, it changed. And essentially this story becomes quite enjoyable, a bit repetitive of what happens in the story, because what we have these authors being invited to the house of a famous author who recently died. They're there to witness the reading of a will, they're told. But then they're given a challenge. They're locked in a room, like an escape room, and they're told you have an hour to solve a riddle and escape. If you don't escape, somebody dies. Then you have to go to the next room, and next room, and next room. And maybe one person gets out, maybe nobody gets out, we don't know. But you have to escape each room within 1 hour. And the mysteries in this book are quite interesting. The characters in this book, they're all written to be different and all like there to be antagonistic towards each other as well. They don't rub very well together in this story. That was quite interesting, and I think sometimes characters like that, when they're all like that, can be quite jarring in a book, a bit over the top, but in this book it actually works to the book's favour. I quite like that in this story, their interactions. The book does become repetitive. I mean, you can imagine escape room after escape room after escape room. It can be repetitive. There are little things that break that up through the book that were quite well done. And overall, this book can be quite surprising, I think, and quite interesting with some interesting characters. Ends up being very good. So if you can get through that little first part of the story where it is very metaphor heavy, you'll find the rest of the book enjoyable, I think. It was Her House First, written by Cherie Priest. Now, I found this book quite disappointing, mostly because I read The Drowning House, written by the same author, and I loved that story a lot. And this book just wasn't as good. The atmosphere in this book just wasn't that strong, and this book felt more like just a story about house repairs than anything else. I mean, the protagonist wasn't even that engaging in this story, doesn't carry the emotional weight of this story, and the protagonist needed to. There is a mystery about one other character in this story that is a bit engaging. I like that. I think that was interesting in the story, added something a bit extra. But take that away, and this book basically is about house repairs, about a character coming in with a budget and trying to repair a house within that budget or under the budget, and doing some work herself on the house as well. That's what the book essentially is. It's like changing rooms with a little hint of a paranormal aspect here and there. And I liked the thing about the ghosts in this book, though. We have point of view chapters from the view of a ghost. I thought that was quite unique, a bit quirky, and I like that because the voice of that point of view was quite well done. But overall, quite disappointing because the other book I read by the same author was so good. I expected a book like that. Murder at Blackwood Inn, written by Penny Warner, a cozy mystery and the first book in a series. Now this has elements of a classic cozy mystery book. We have interesting setup, interesting setting. We have a murder, of course. We have some quirky characters. We have a protagonist who is somewhat engaging and investigates a little bit in the story. We have some interesting other characters going on in the book. So elements in many cozy mysteries are in this story. But the mystery itself was a bit ho-hum. It was just wasn't that super engaging, especially for the first book in a series. And the investigation wasn't that super engaging either. And the resolution of the mystery felt more by chance than anything else. It's one of those books where the culprit just walks up and confesses. And I understand it happens sometimes, especially in the cozy mystery space, that can happen. But when it does happen, it lets the whole story down, I think. I do think there are some good elements in there. I like the interesting setting of where the book takes place. I thought that was okay. There are some quirky characters, interesting characters. It has a bit of Sabrina the Teenage Witch vibe in this story in certain elements. And if you read this book, you'll find out why. Do a bit of research. I won't tell you why in this video, but do a bit of research. You might get that kind of paranormal witchy vibe from this story. But overall, it was interesting enough. I would read more books in this series because I think that this series can improve. And I think the characters will develop more and more as the series goes on. So this series has hooked me enough to want to read more. But as for a first book in the series, it's not outstanding enough like other first books in series I've read. This Missing Piece is Killing Me, written by Ros Noonan, cozy mystery, book 2 in a series. Now, the first book of this series I thought was more engaging. This book, I think, was less about the mystery and more about family drama. Family drama in this book got top shelf, the rest was just underneath the lower sections where you have to bend and try to find the best product. This book, I think, the family drama was just overpowering and, for me, quite disappointing. Even though parts of that family drama, their family dynamics, parts of them were, a bit interesting and a bit engaging. I want a mystery. I want the balance between the cozy elements and the mystery to be better. And in this book, that balance was way off and made the mystery feel less than anything else in the story. And then with the jigsaw elements as well, jigsaw puzzle elements in this book, the whole characters, they love jigsaw puzzles. And in the first book, there was a big component of the whole story, their love of jigsaw puzzles. And in this book, while they do jigsaw puzzles here and there, that element was just so underdone in this book. It was quite disappointing because, for me, this is more a themed cozy mystery series where jigsaw puzzles are a big component, or they should be. And to have that as a very minor component in a book like this, in a series that's a themed cozy mystery series, in my eyes, that was quite disappointing. So for me, this book, not as good as book one. I would read more in the series, but I need that balance between coziness and the mystery to be better in future books in the series. So stay with me. We're in the last section of this video, just other reads I read during the month that don't fit a category. The first is Annibot, written by Sierra Greer. It's a sci-fi book. This book is very engaging. It's one of my favorite reads for the month. And this book is like an emotional gut punch, really. It's quite shocking in some ways, but very engaging. And the things it discusses in this story, I think it's so well done. Especially for a sci-fi book, I think this book is very subtle in the things it discusses, even though they're big parts of the story. So essentially in this book, we have synthetic life and AI, and they're a big part of the world. People can buy synthetic life forms and own them for different reasons. You could have synthetic kind of housekeeper and maid, that sort of thing. You can have a synthetic, more love interest for you if you want that. There are different reasons why you can buy synthetic life, and it can be programmed in different ways. So in this book, we have Annie, who's our main protagonist, and having a protagonist who's a synthetic life form in this world, I wondered about that. I wondered what that point of view would be like. But Annie in this book is so human-like in this story in her point of view, and what happens in the story, she's more human than the humans in this story, because the humans in this story act very badly. They're the bad actors in the book. So Annie is in this person's life who owns her, basically, and he treats her quite badly. And I won't go into all the reasons why, because I don't want to just discuss that in this video, but he does treat her quite badly, and Annie is starting to develop and grow beyond her programming. And he doesn't like that, and he tries to do things to stifle that in the story. That's part of it, the part of the book. But her struggle and her growth and what she goes through and the eye-opening view she has of the world, that's just told so well in this story and makes Annie a great protagonist. I like her character so much. I like what she goes through, not because she has struggles, but I think it forms her so much in the story. I think this story is just well told, well structured, and just a great avenue, I think, to have that discussion about synthetic life and AI and all that sort of thing, about whether it should be controlled, about whether humans should own that and control that in all aspects, about what happens if synthetic life forms really happen. I mean, all that kind of thing is discussed in this story very well, I think. Very much a thought-provoking story, very speculative, I think, but a great story nonetheless. Moon of the Turning Leaves, written by Waubgeshig Rice, sci-fi, book 2 in a series. I think it's called the Moon series, and this book is 10 years after book 1, and book 1 was fantastic. Great atmosphere, great characters, great tension, very dystopian in feel in book 1. This book, while it is dystopian, but the atmosphere, the tone and feel, not the same at all. It's more about a journey, and the journey becomes quite tedious and repetitive. We do have some things happen along that journey, so some events are bigger than others, of course, but overall, it's quite bland and tedious. Characters are good and interesting still, but I think this book is more about romanticizing things, certain things in the story, than really telling a great gripping story like book 1. I understand the tone, the feel is going to be different than book 1. It's more about journey back home, that sort of thing. But for me, just not as well told, not as interesting, and not as engaging, and the dystopian feel in this story really wasn't there. It just, even when the author tries to bring something in to ramp it up, it felt like, to me, not what the author wanted. It felt like the author was told to do that because it's expected at a certain part in the story. So I felt tired. I felt just not forming a true part of this book. I felt like it was too forced. So for me, very disappointing. Book 1 in this series is amazing. You don't have to read this book if you don't want to, because it's really 10 years later and really doesn't join that many things between the two books. So if you want to read book 1 in this series, I recommend that a lot. This book, I don't really recommend it much at all. The Book of Witching by C.J. Cook. It's a horror and also kind of part thriller as well, especially in the present day narrative. This book is split between past and present. The past, I think, being in the 16th century during the Spanish Inquisition. And I like that narrative a lot better. Just the tension and the sense of injustice and what goes on in that narrative. The atmosphere was just rich and dense and just really enjoyable for those things. And I like the protagonist in that narrative very much. The present day narrative, while it has its moments, it's more of a thriller, I think, than a horror. We do have some paranormal things going on in the present day narrative. I mean, it's all about paranormal possible possession, that sort of thing. But I think there is a divide between both narratives. There's a loose connection, but that connection, I think, is not as strong as it could be. I do like characters in this story. Like, I think there's a main character in the present day narrative, which that character is just written so well. What she goes through, her feelings, her dialogue, just what she suffers, I think is told so well. A great character, one of my favourite characters so far this year, actually, in that narrative. And overall, this is an enjoyable story. It's not the best book I've read. It is enjoyable for some things. I think it's a soft paranormal horror. I don't think it's really deep and dark, dense horror. It could have been darker and denser, I think. I think the author just didn't take those chances. Maybe didn't know how to, possibly. I'm not sure. But for me, still enjoyable, still worth the read, but it's not just deep and dark enough, for me anyway. The Foxwife, written by Yang-Shi Chu. It's historic fantasy. Now, this is a quiet book, a quiet and gentle story. I quite enjoyed it. Now, what I like about this book primarily is one of the narrators in this story, one of the point of view narrators. There are two main ones. One I liked a lot, one not so much. The one I like a lot is called Snow, and her voice, I think, is fantastic, so is her character. This book is about a lot of things, though. It's about life, about love, about grief, about hope, about forgiveness, and it feels like a lot. I mean, how can a great book be about so many things? But this book ties it all in quite well. I did think the historical details in this book were very light touch. Not a lot of detail about settings and the time period. It's more about characters. It's more about their stories. I think the author chose that, but for me, I would want more detail. I want a bit more depth in the setting, a bit more depth in the world these characters are in. So I want to feel immersed in the whole world when I read stories like this, especially if it's about historical fiction and fantasy. I mean, in both those genres, I want to be immersed in the environment that they're set in, because I think both genres, the setting is quite powerful. The setting is a core component to really engage readers in both genres. But I think the true strength about this book is it's a book with heart. It's a book with that emotional substance. And this book, I think, would be great for readers who enjoy more emotional stories that have substance, that have great characters that feel warm and heartfelt. And I think if you like that type of book, you'll enjoy this story. The last book I'll talk about is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, written by Grady Hendrix. It's a horror, and when I started reading this book, Grady Hendrix is an author where I have not the best relationship with his stories. Some I really enjoy, some I just think are middle of the road or just less than that. And I think it's all down to what he puts in his stories and how he writes them. The thing about this book is much of it feels quite juvenile in tone and feel. Now, I get in some ways why that is, because our point of view narrator is a teenage girl. But for me, this story is also meant to be about social commentary, about quite serious social commentary about that something that happened in the past. And that something that happened is when teenage girls or women who were not married and who were pregnant. They were forced to go to homes to have their children. Those children were into forced adoptions. That happened in the past. It did. And you may know people it happened to. You may know people who were adopted as babies because of that. So for me, I was just interested in how the author would put that in the story. How that be written. I think in a lot of ways it was written in a good way. I mean, the author took care, I think, to be bringing about the emotional viewpoint sometimes of those characters, those teenage girls who were there, forced to be there against their will. But in other ways, the juvenile aspect of the story lets that down, because this is a serious topic, and I get that this author likes to put humor or lighter things in his stories, in his horror stories, and I have an issue with that because I don't mind a bit of humor in different genres, but I think the way Grady Hendrix puts that in stories sometimes is just the wrong way about doing it. That's my personal viewpoint, and maybe other people don't have that viewpoint and they think his stories are wonderful. That's fine. But for me, I think what he does with the story and the characters and putting this juvenile light on things, it lets other things down a lot in this book. The first 100 or so pages of this story were just repetitive and, unforgivable in the way it's written, really. Even though it's introducing us to the characters and what's going on with the main character, it's trying to bring that emotional viewpoint, I think, into the story. And it really tries to do that, I think, in a good way. But for me, it's a long introduction to this story. This story is meant to be a horror story. A long introduction, because there are moments where the horror elements are good, but they could have been brought forward. We didn't need a long introduction to this story, especially one that was so repetitive. We didn't really at all. So for me, it's very uneven in the way it's written. I think this book kind of feels like it wasn't really finished. It was half done. It was like a best effort and not polished. And people think, well, this author, he's been around for a while. This is his maybe 7th or 8th book or something. We know it's going to sell. We're going to put it out there and just sell it anyway. And I think sometimes that happens with authors when they start getting famous, because they've got a base. Got a base who's going to read their books anyway. Many people are going to buy them or from libraries, but they're going to read them anyway. And sometimes that polish, I think, is left of stories. And I think this is an example of that, because that first 100 pages could have been 30 pages, and then we could have had more impactful horror moments going earlier on in the story. So there you had all the books I read in July. Now, don't be shy. Let me know if you read any of those books and what you thought. There's some quite popular books for me during July. Let me know your thoughts on them, and let me know what your favourite reads for July are as well. I'm always on the lookout for more books to add to my TBR, because like any good reader out there, I've got a TBR, as long as the length of Australia. I mean, it's so long, it's not a joke anymore. My TBR is very long. I don't know if I'll read all the books on there, before I'm 70. I mean, who knows? But I'm not the type of reader who goes from the start to the end on my list. I just pick and choose. And sometimes my random picking programs pick for me. So if you let me know your favourite books, who knows? They could be my next read. They could be a read in the next month or so. You never know, because I never know. So let me know your favourite reads. Let me know your thoughts on the books I've talked about. Let me know if you want to read the books I've talked about. Just drop some comments for me on the video. On my channel, I review books of all different genres. Check out my channel and subscribe. On the screen now is a link to another video for a book I'm sure you'll enjoy.